Drive is not just a movie. It is a fairy tale, a neo-noir, and of course, literally me. Drive is pure kino. Fairy tale may be the last thing you'd expect this film to be called, but Drive is essentially an elaborate retelling of the fable, The Scorpion and the Frog. Driver also wears a jacket with a scorpion on the back. For those unfamiliar, or who need a refresher, the tale of the scorpion and the frog goes something like this. A scorpion asks a frog to escort him across a body of water. The frog is initially skeptical, suggesting that the scorpion could attack him with his stinger. But the scorpion appeals to the frog's sense of reason, replying that he would not sting him, if only out of self-interest. Why would he bother to sting the frog during the trip? It would only spell out his own doom. The frog agrees to help him cross, but halfway there, sure enough, the scorpion plunges his stinger into the frog, quite literally backstabbing him. The frog is shocked, once again appealing to rationality. "You fool," he cries, "now we'll both drown." As they sink, all the scorpion can say is, "I couldn't help it, it's in my nature." The lesson of this fable is that against all reason, some will act completely against their self-interest, and not even out of altruism, but rather just out of a natural compulsion. Have you ever stood on the edge of a cliff and had that fleeting thought about jumping off? Not even out of a suicidal urge, but more so just for the hell of it? That is what this fable is hitting on, acting on these compulsive thoughts, as some do. Some people will hurt others simply because they cannot help themselves. Driver is one of those people. He even identifies with the scorpion of the frog tale, and even this self-awareness cannot help him stop himself. So who is Driver? Yes, he does not have a name. He is just a guy that likes cars. When asked what he does, he replies, "I drive." He works as a stunt driver for movies, which to some might seem like something cool enough to brag about. But honestly, it seems that he only does this because he would drive regardless, so he just made a career out of it for convenience. When he's not driving, he's working in a garage, fixing cars. To be frank, he's just autistically devoted to cars, though he has a passing interest in a girl from his apartment. However, he doesn't talk to her until her car breaks down in a grocery store parking lot. So even their relationship starts based off his compulsion towards cars. His love interest Irene is a single mother with her own child. From a self-interest perspective, this is probably not a wise dating option. I can already hear the cries of the manosphere talking about how stupid it is to date single moms. But it doesn't matter how much you appeal to rationality. At the end of the day, men are irrational creatures. They act out of compulsion, a drive, if you will. If this was Driver's only irrational action, however, it would still be fairly reasonable. Driver is lonely, and so is she. And Driver seems to find comfort in playing a fatherly role as well. So good for him. Things change though when her husband and father of her child returns from prison. Funny enough, he is only referred to as Standard, which not only is another car reference, but also provides a foil to Driver. Driver, metaphorically speaking, is the opposite of a Standard. He is an automatic. He does things automatically, compulsively, even against his own interest. Bizarrely, even with Standard back in the picture, Driver still hangs around as a friend. A more rational man would probably take the hint and move on, but he still spends time with Irene and Standard, out of habit, if nothing else. Then one day, Standard gets beat up. Driver demands to know who did this to him. Standard jokingly replies, "What, so you can go beat them up for me?" Of course, this is exactly what Driver has in mind. Standard is in debt with some criminals, and even though Driver truly has no reason to fight on Standard's behalf, the very action going against his own self-interest in multiple ways, he nevertheless wants to help. They end up involved in a heist, where, surprise surprise, Driver's role is the getaway driver. They end up with a bag of money worth about $1 million, and then Standard gets shot down in cold blood. A car chase commences, and now Driver is involved way too much in criminal activity to ever turn back. He has a target on his head, and even though his whole reason for the heist was to help Standard, he is now dead. Much like the scorpion and the frog, Driver and Standard are both condemned. Later on, Driver chases down one of the main criminals onto a beach, where he drowns him in the water, much like the scorpion drowns the frog. Driver himself then brings up the fable that I've been mentioning to the final criminal that he must deal with. The villain is also very scorpion-like in his behavior. In fact, they are so similar that their final encounter is them stabbing each other. Then, in the most telling moments of the film, the ending, Driver, despite a stab wound, gets in his car and drives away, leaving the bag containing $1 million sitting in the middle of a parking lot. Irene, now widowed, has no idea what he has just done or where he went. And as for Driver, he does the only thing that he knows how to do: drive. Much like the Scorpion, Driver has now fully displayed his complete lack of self-interest. He does not take the money that he has won. He does not return to the girl that he has fought for. And he most likely will spend the rest of his life on the run, as there are probably more criminals that are on their way. This fairy tale displays the tragic nature of man, but it also romanticizes it. The film takes influence from classic noir films, and most especially has a great flair and style present. Despite the violence and the brutal message, Drive is quite aesthetic. Driver is a literally me character because he celebrates the contradictory and idiosyncratic personality of man. He doesn't fight it or try to rationalize it. In fact, he barely speaks. He is the irrational male that many lost souls can relate to. In that sense, he is literally me. Far from the sun, all that exists are passing shadows, and the chiaroscuro flickers of light like a drive through the city at night. But wait a minute, hold on. That's not the whole picture. Is Driver the Scorpion, or is he the frog? After all, the Scorpion is on his back, much like how the Scorpion in the fairy tale was on the back of the frog, and he is constantly giving others a free ride at his own expense, just the same as the frog. This fairy tale showcases the duality of man. He irrationally hurts others, but also allows others to hurt him. Marshall McLuhan once said that the car is the carapace of man. A carapace being the tough outer coating which turtles, crustaceans, and yes, arachnids, like scorpions, all have. The car is man's shell, which shields him from the outside world. This lends more credibility to the idea that Driver might be more like the frog than the scorpion, as he does not have this shell naturally. He has to put on this tough exterior, much like how a hermit crab searches for a new shell. It's fitting that he works as a stunt driver, as all his actions feel as if he's putting on an act. He only truly seems at home in his shell when he is in his car. Only when he is driving does he feel at ease. Since their inception, there has been a strange relationship between cars and masculinity. I think that McLuhan was correct in his assessment, and Drive explores this phenomenon in an aesthetic way. At the end of the day, we are all human beings. We want the approval of others, and to avoid hurt. Many of us put on a mask to hide, or run away with our carapace, all to avoid a second of vulnerability. I highly recommend Drive. My only criticism is that the violence is a bit gratuitous. I guess it truly is like the fairy tales of old in this respect, but besides that, give it a spin. Our acculturation continues, as we ask ourselves, what's in a me?